One Focus Radio.
Welcome to the show, it's Dyer's Daily. Keeping in the know, it's Dyer's Daily. We've got chat, we've got discussion, nice and slow, ain't no rushing, reading emails and events. Sometimes he makes no sense. It's time to start the show, it's Dyer's Daily. He'll be there in a mo, it's Dyer's Daily. We've got plays, we've got interviews, even stuff that's in the news. Local and otherwise, come and try it on for size, it's Dyer's Daily.
Hello and welcome to the podcast for Thursday the 22nd of November 2018. Yes, on today's podcast we will be talking about the recurring themes that happen every generation. That is what we're going to be talking about today. But first, let's have a word from some other podcasts that are out there. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Take it away.
When it comes to women's healthcare, too often we face limited options and doctors who just don't get it.
I feel at times that I know more than some of the providers I see.
Lady Parts is a new podcast that takes a wide view on women's health. We'll talk about the latest drugs on the market.
Something that is very low risk, but which isn't treating the disease, is just trying to reduce symptoms.
And alternative ways of understanding our bodies.
Women have more yin energy and men have more yang energy. And so that's why it's more common, like for men, to have strokes, have heart attacks. Women are more prone to stuff like fibromyalgia and autoimmune and stuff that's more deficiency related.
We'll also talk policy, where the healthcare system supports us and where it lets us down hard. Nothing is too gross.
I don't want to describe this because some people who like to eat liver might not eat liver after, but I can recall like clumps of blood clots just coming out of me.
And we'll have some fun, too. So that means women can have more sex.
You're not going to deplete your essence.
Listen to Lady Parts with me, Andrea Maraskin, coming October 21st, wherever you get your podcasts.
Dyer's Daily.
I always have this theory that actually nothing ever changes and that really life and the world is just a complete kind of cycle. And I think that's been happening over the last 100 years. They always say that something that is in kind of goes out and then comes back in again. And I often think that is the case, that actually every generation since maybe the 1950s has kind of been exactly the same. It's just that the pointers have been different. And I say this because as a guy who grew up in the 90s as a child and seeing all these big boy bands on TV and screaming kids or what, you know, all that sort of thing, all the girls screaming and running after the boy bands and all this sort of thing. If you go back 20 years to the 1970s and look at bands like the Bay City Rollers and the Jacksons, the Osmonds, it's exactly the same. And I remember seeing a lot of Top of the Pops from the 90s and thinking, wow, you know, this is big, this is kind of epic and in the moment. And if you go back 20 years again to the 1970s, you've got, there was this show called Supersonic, which was kind of like Top of the Pops, but on ITV. And it didn't have any presenter. It was just all kind of done from the control room or something. And the performances are humongous. Mostly, you know, it's mimed, of course. But the performances are humongous because they got fireworks going off. They got light shows. It's a huge, huge thing. And, of course, all the screaming girls. And it's that thing where people growing up in the 90s would have gone, well, this is all new and fresh. No, it was done 20 years before. If you go back 10 years, even more, you've got the Beatles, of course, who are kind of seen as the beginning of that, but here's the thing, guys. You go back 10 years before that to the 1950s, and Elvis Presley, with his hip shaking and everything, was doing exactly the same thing. So I think certainly in media terms and entertainment, everything comes back around, and we're kind of in this never-ending cycle. Sometimes you look at things and you go, well, who's going to listen to that first incarnation of rock and roll again? Probably not. But if you remember, in the 70s, they had this kind of mods and rockers thing all come back, didn't they? Bands like Mud and Shawaddy that were doing their kind of glam versions of rockabilly songs. You know, that was a huge thing. People like the Darts and all that sort of thing that all came back into fashion. And then in the 90s, when they were doing kind of souped up versions of disco songs, so everything kind of comes back around again. It's a bit like in the mid-2000s when the musicals suddenly became popular in film again after the success of High School Musical, which actually, when I first saw High School Musical, I was a bit dubious. I was a bit like, well, this is a big thing at the moment. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to like it. But then I realised it's just Grease. It's literally just a reversion of Grease with new music. It did used to annoy me, actually, as a side note, that there's a song in it called Stick to the Status Quo. So whenever you typed in Status Quo into iTunes, that was always the top one that came up. That used to really annoy me. But, I actually thought this is quite good, but it just feels a bit like a modern version of Grease. In fact, I'd almost say, sorry kids, that it's actually better than Grease, because Grease has got some really mixed messages in it. I find it really, I'm going to use that word again, problematic. That I don't know. But I just find that every kind of generation has their own version of something. You know, how many times in the 90s did you hear somebody, one of your elders, say, Steps? They're a little bit like ABBA, aren't they? And that's exactly what Pete Waterman was going for. He was going for like ABBA on speed. And of course, if you go for 10 years previously, to use out my previous phrasing, you look at Pete Waterman and the Stock Aitken and Waterman thing, there was this whole thing where it was basically he wanted to be Motown. He wanted to have a sound all of his own. He wanted to kind of have these big artists come in and, you know, have this very recognizable sound, a little bit like Motown and a few of the other things that are out there, you know, like the Bakersfield sound and the Nashville sound. And really that was the Saw sound, the Stock Aitken and Waterman sound, that very synthesized and very modern take on mostly classic records. It used to actually annoy me, really, because they used to do all these versions of old songs, Stock Aitken and Waterman, you know, people like Jason Donovan and Rick Astley, Kylie Minogue. They used to do things like Tears on My Pillow and Rhythm of the Rain and stuff that actually shouldn't work. Sonia's End of the World? No. It worked a lot better with top, kind of high-tempo songs. But the low-tempo ballads, no, forget about it. But still, my point is that every generation seems to have the kind of same thing. It's just kind of gone round again. Do you agree? I mean, which era, I'll ask you, dear listener, but you don't have to tell me, which era did you grow up in, and did you see any similarity in either the past or the future in terms of when you grew up? So did you grow up in the 50s and go in the 70s? Well, this is all very kind of, this seems new, and then one of your elders says, well, actually, you know, this is actually quite an old thing going on. It does annoy me sometimes, and I have said this. I said this on yesterday's podcast, actually, when something hip comes along and people go, oh, well, this is new, this is hip, and it's like, well, actually, they were doing this years before. It's not the first time that this has been done. And I do wonder whether there is any room for innovation in the media industry now, because literally, apart from the internet, nothing has really changed. I mean, they had that scare a couple of days ago in Johnson's Publishing, Johnston's Publishing, and the Johnston's Press, that's what they're called. They went into administration a few days ago, and suddenly everyone was like, "Oh no, everyone's gonna lose their jobs." But of course now they've been bought out by their creditors. All jobs are saved. But the thing is, if that went down, there would be so many newspaper hacks and journalists and whatever out there that would they be able to I don't know. I mean, I just think that would be a huge catastrophe for the media industry. Absolutely huge. One, because it's local news. Local news needs to be covered, no matter where you are, because we are one nation, but we're also one nation of several different parts. And also, I find that, there are all these journalists out there that have kind of learnt certain ways, and if the newspaper didn't exist, they'd have nowhere to impart those ways. Although, as I said yesterday, usually in some kind of popularity, maybe that would engage some kind of rebirth in the newspaper industry. Maybe that is what needs to happen. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe it will all come around in the end. Who knows? Some media, I mean, we're not using wax cylinders, are we? So that's pretty much defunct. I don't know, the whole thing. I realise this is a very rambly podcast, but I do enjoy talking to you, and thank you very much for listening. And with that, let's bring this podcast to an end. But remember, thank you for listening to Dyers Daily. Please remember to rate, comment and subscribe on your favourite podcast provider. Look forward to talking to you again tomorrow. Be sure to check out the website southwavesaudio.co.uk, and from me, Jamie Dyer, I say thank you for listening once again, and bye bye for now. This has been a South Waves audio production.